Welcome to the Going Green podcast. And today we're going to have a look at a brand new report out today. In fact, only a few hours ago today, really. And this is on the UK climate change. And this committee, the CCC, have basically come up with this idea that climate change has arrived and our country is still strikingly unprepared for it.
So you say that, and it's not quite correct. Basically, is this CCC is an independent panel or independent committee that looks at the UK climate change risk assessment and basically works out on is the risk assessment, the government's risk assessment of climate change correct, appropriate, or those sorts of things. Because obviously, it's one of the dumb things where welcome to government bureaucracy. This is the whole path of the battle. But essentially, it goes is that in 2013, after Paris, the UK decided to set up all the climate change stuff, and basically, it needed to look at what are the risks that are going to affect the UK going forward from climate change. Yeah, and this ranges a huge a list of sort of what they believe to be Pacific. This is sort of loss of biodiversity. This is
61 items, you said.
61 items that they assessed were for risk in approximately about five areas. So that's how they divided it up, those sort of things. And so they also created this committee, the CCC, which is of course the Climate Change Committee, which basically reviews whether or not the risks are appropriate and that how well the government have been working on said risks, or mitigating those risks. And basically, the CCC gives a scorecard for how well the government has done, and basically the government then writes a report saying this is what we've done over the last few to mitigate the risks, and these are the new changes to those same 61 risks. As I said, it's a bunch of, say, bureaucracy, but you've got to do these working out what risks are there to then do something about those risks, because otherwise, you wouldn't know where to start. So this is what the whole report was trying to establish initially, and this is going to be coming to its third time. They publish one every 5 years because they said, that's a decent period to actually do something and see if something's changing, to monitor those sorts of things. And this is the third time this is now happening.
So you said that there are 45 basic categories here in 5 blocks, and basically what they've done is they set the highest priority for the government. The government need to work on these. In fact, last time 5 things.
Yeah, well, technically, it's the government says they're going to work on those 5 things, and then the CCC says whether or not those were the right things to work on, if that makes any sense. So, yeah.
Okay, so they've worked on 5 things. How did they get on?
Well, according to the CCC committee, the answer is not well.
I think that was it, wasn't it?
Yeah, the answer is the critical, say the quotes we're taking from their little report is strikingly unprepared. What's some other one? That basically the government is not putting on together a plan to tackle all that reflects the scale and the nature of the risks. And it is sort of, and they said they're trying to now panic their way to actually say they've done something, which of course is bad, because if you're working on something, then you can say, well, we've been working on it. Let's move on to, we've been, it's been hard. We need more time. That's fair enough. And that's no problem.
So you've been working on this and you've done some things.
Well, they've done some things, and it's not, but the more important thing is, of course, let's say they've been working on the 5 things. The government, in theory, should be moving on to the next 5 things essentially, because they have their top priorities. These are the critical things, as opposed to some moderate and some less severe, and so they've been working on the 5 years. So, and then the committee says, all right, what have you done with yourself? And the answer is, well, those 5 risks we said that are really bad last 5 years ago. Well, we've worked on them, but nothing's changed. They are still the worst bad wild west. And so basically, we're going to work on them again. Which is fair enough. That's no problem.
Except the other 40 odd aren't having a look in, really.
Yeah, and it's sort of like saying they've got 45 or 61 different risks associated with climate change, and essentially they are failing to actually do any of them, which is why they're calling, say, woefully unprepared for the neck of climate change. And the government's got no plan. This is the whole, there's no strategy to actually complete one of these risks, And then the government says, oh, but we've been working on flood defences. Has that decreased the risk of flood or flooding from this
From 5 years ago?
5 years ago? And the answer is no. So why did we spend apparently 5.2 billion on flood defences? Was that we needed to spend? Do we need to spend more money on flood defences? What do we need to actually decrease that risk? And this is essentially what the committee are trying to report on, is basically that it's what has happened, what is done. So this is the whole crux of the whole climate issue, or and it's other things. It's sort of, you look at the government's targets. The government is meant to be, 2025, not 2025, 2050, as many net zero. They've been now said, and they need to move that a decade earlier. And the answer is, we could actually not be able to get there from this target due to the fact that we're not doing anything about it. It's one of those things, sad things, where nothing's happening. And so I can't really say we're playing straight ahead through into nothingness, for a climate plan. There's no policy, there's no change plans. And people go, well, what are you doing about it? And we go, oh, nothing. Or they say they're doing things, but they are not reducing the risks. So.
Yeah, big problem. Right, so there are a whole load of different things that they have tried to work on. And basically, not enough progress has been made on some of these things. It's strikingly unprepared. There were a few things that I looked there that were okay. I was just trying to read the report, and at the moment it said their server's down.
Well, imagine, because that's everybody's trying to read it.
Trying to download it, yes. But basically, taking Paul's mobile, where it is actually on here, basically we just look through these things, and the urgency score really goes like this. Most of them say more action needed. A few say further investigation. And the odd one or two says sustain current action. So there are some good ones. Except when I look at what they were, things like freshwater species and habitats, and we've got some sort of new species colonizations are happening. That looks fairly good.
Yeah,
Except it's just sort of so little, because basically most of them are highlighted red or bright red, suggesting that more action is needed. And this is basically, where we are at the moment, which is, it's not looking terribly good. But really, we ought to be sort of able to try and do some of these things an awful lot better than basically, well, We have been. So, what basically, I'm trying to just sort of call up the thing because I've lost everything at the moment. Um, let's go back and have a quick look at sort of some of the things that were happening that, in theory, we should have tried to be able to cope with. So, last year we had more than 25,000 wildfires that broke out. We had the warmest day on record. And we've got the extreme heat. That also means that rainfall's been consistently low. Now, they're all related, but basically, one of the problems that we've got is that they've been working on the problem of a drought, haven't they?
Yes, so they've been working on the idea. Technically, it's called water shortage, which is the whole problem of sort of say if you've got a drought, then that's leading to water shortage. So that's what they were said they're working on. That's wonderful, fine. But the problem is, last year, of course, we had the drought, and they were very close to implementing all their procedures of severe drought, water shortage. We're not talking about hose pipe bans. We were talking uh, severe sort of water rationing, that sort of thing. And it leads to the place where that's happening more often, and we should have dealt with the water shortage. We should have dealt with the issue of it having water shortages, and so when the drought came or was going
But it's
to
still
arrive,
happening, isn't it?
yes, was that basically it we didn't have to have the drought because we were fine with the water because we dealt with the idea that we were going to have these water shortages. So we looked at getting more water, and whether we moving that around, digging a channel from the north to the south, yeah, those sort of things.
All right, some of them are going to take a long time. Let's be honest, some things aren't going to be solved in 5 years, but they actually shouldn't be getting worse. And I
Yes,
think this is the basic problem that we're actually facing. Uh, the government decided they were going to work on flooding and coastal sort of problems, and they've done some work on that, but it's not complete, and they haven't done enough. There is the risks to health being highlighted with high temperatures. Now, the government can't stop the high temperatures,
no,
but they can put in various things to not mitigate it, but make sure when people are suffering from high temperatures, they can be sort of dealt with. And we know the NHS has got even more problems, and giving them extra problems, doesn't help. They're struggling to cope. We've got the risk of shortages to the public water supply, and especially that for agriculture and perhaps for industry as well. And really, not enough has been done on that. We're still coming into this year facing a water shortage. And this water shortage that we're facing, we shouldn't be, because the government had 5 years to work on this, and we're going into this year already sort of had a drought last year. The winter's been fairly dry, so we know we're going into a drought this year. And why hasn't the government sort of put in lots of things to say, right, okay, we're going into a drought. This is what we need to do.
so yeah, so along with that, you hear yes, but the government say they are doing these things. You hear lots of campaigns currently still running from last summer about saving water because we know it's going to be happening. So we're not denying that those things are happening and those things are working, but it's just the panic nature of all these things, if that makes any sense. It's we put things in last year to say, look, that's what's happening, but they haven't stopped, and the reason is they haven't stopped is because the risk's still there. What has the government done about it? Well, the answer is no, but they're not actually showing any, I say, plan they're not actually showing any effective ways of doing things. Let's say they say, right, we're going to build a channel. Now, I'm not saying they want to cost it and sort of work out how to do it, but that's the sort of thing that needed to have happened, but not needed to have happened now, when the government's obviously now panicking because it's going to happen. But they should have been panicking and sort of decreasing the idea that it could happen in the future. This idea that you sort of say, how can you decrease the risk? Therefore, if you're prepared for an eventuality, then when it comes up, because you're prepared, it's not going to take you, of course, so it's less worse, if that makes any sense. We're not saying that we won't get uh, bad weather, but the answer is, would the bad weather affect infrastructure? We're talking about how many homes keep getting damaged by all the storms that blow through. And the answer is,
Yeah, you can't stop the storms, but what you can do
is stop the damage, or more precisely, let's work out how to be prepared for the damage, so that homes, like like we were talking about the storm over last winter. They said that 1 million homes were still without power for approximately a month. Right? How can what risks? That's a risk. They really happened. So how do you make sure that they're only loss of power for a couple of days? Those are the sorts of things we're looking at. And it's not just the government. I know we're all focusing on the government, but it's also industry. Industry, say like the power companies, they've got the risk of not being able to support power. Ofgem do fine them if they have lack of power, and they did find them sums of money because they were unprepared for the storms. That they're given plenty of notice, by the way, and yet they've still failed to make their power grid, or their little section of the system, resilient to the storms. Now, not saying they couldn't sort of predict where the storm's going to hit and say, oh, a loose pylon or a telegraph pole fell over because a tree fell in. Now, we're not saying they shouldn't be, but then it's being prepared for that tree felling, or knowing that, oh, look, by this route, there's lots of tall trees. If the wind blows in one direction, it's going to be, push away from it. But of course, if the wind blows onto it, and it's monitoring those and prepared for those. But they always act so surprised that these things happen. And the answer is, but why should you be surprised? What are you should be spending money on doing these things, or, you're raking in all this profit, except the problem is that's not where the money's going to. They're not doing this because, oh, don't need to do that when I can go on my lavish holidays.
Oh, all right, okay. So basically, this committee have had a look at various different areas. They've looked at basically the natural environment and the assets that we've got in our natural environments. And there's a huge load of risks. There's a few risks and opportunities, and there are a few odd opportunities that are there. And against virtually all of these is more action is needed. Then looking at the basic infrastructure of the country, it is basically red across the board here, saying, we need to do work on, and this is more action urgently needed on water, energy, transport, ICT, and we're looking at a whole load of cascading failures that can happen. One causes the next, which causes the next, and so on. How about our health? Well, we know we've got a lot of problems with the NHS in this country, but basically it's not just that. It's looking at communities and the built environment. And this one is, again, red across the board. Basically, problems in sea level rising, in flooding, in high temperatures, extreme weather. And this country does not seem to be prepared for that. How about business and industry? Well, I can tell you that there's one of these that we're actually all right on. Business access to finance, investment, and insurance. We do have quite a good system set there for coping with extreme weather. Everything else, of course, is red across the board. And then we've got to worry about our international relationships and dimensions, as it's called here. And can we sort of secure food? No. Uh,
Well, yes, it was.
can we do all sorts of things? And again, it's largely red across the board. It's sort of basically woefully prepared to do everything.
Yeah, it was. We was talking about silly things such as, we over this winter we've had a food shortage. I say food shortage, a vegetable shortage, because of course the weather in northern Africa and sort of the southern Mediterranean have been poor. That's where we having a previous article, previous podcast of talking about lack of salads and tomato shortages. But because of this, the thing is, the report says because the UK imports 50% of the food, the food that the UK consumes, then we do need to worry about those sort of things, and perhaps maybe we need to establish better supply chains, or more precisely, they need to look at sort of getting diversifying the supply chains instead of buying it all from, say, North Africa. You buy it from, I don't know, Chile, Asia, all over the place, just so you've got resilience and network. But once again, they haven't done that. And so we got a shortage. And everybody's like suddenly surprised that we've got a shortage. Except if you look carefully, all these things, I say you could predict, but you could see the factors going into them. And the government, it's not like the government don't know about these factors. They've been for the last 10 years studying the risks, but doing nothing.
Well, no, that's unkind and unfair because they are doing something. It's just not enough.
Yes.
And that's the basic thing. We can do some things ourselves, but for many things, they're actually controlled by the government and government legislation, and they can decide where they want to put their money. We know we've only got so much money, and we have to prioritize where we're going to place that money. But it's better to try and put it so you can actually achieve doing something than to sort of, well, not really achieve something. To throw money at something and not improve it is just really a waste.
Yeah, you sort of hear sort of the idea about low hanging fruit. The answer is, let's say you do something to get it. And most of these things, like the flood defense, is an ongoing battle against things. And I'm not saying they shouldn't be spending sort of, 5.2 billion on flood defense. I'm not saying they shouldn't. They should absolutely be doing that.
But maybe they should probably be doing a bit more.
Exactly. Maybe they need to be doing more, or more precisely, maybe they need to put it in places that would actually more benefit it. I know they're probably saying, "Oh, we've worked out the place that would benefit the most," but the answer is a little bit of money spread everywhere might actually help a lot more, as opposed to a lot of money in one place. I'm not saying that one place might need a lot of money. I'm just, it's obviously, because of course what we're reading is the report. This one was specifically for England, because of course all the devolved governments have their own different locations and priorities for what they're looking into. So this basically risk assessment is for the different parts of the UK in their different areas, because of course some places have different risks compared to others, and so instead of sort of lopping all things together, which is why we have the list of, it's 61 for the UK but 45 for England, because of course England and Scotland do not share. They share some the similar ones, but they don't share others. And so suddenly, sort of, that's where they pick and choose, but they say what is appropriate for each of the devolved nations.
What makes interesting reading, which is why I was doing, was having a look at the assessment in 2017 and reading what basically was important and what was less important. And when you look at the 2023 report, the one that's out today,
Will
you
be
see, yeah,
will,
properly, yeah.
will be coming out.
What we've got is that what needed more action still needs more action. And those things that weren't so serious are also now needing more urgent action. And it's worrying to think that, these are the problems that were sort of given out in 2017, and by 2023, having worked on some of those, we're in a worse state than we were in 2017.
Yeah, it's big problem. Now we do say the fact that, of course, as time moves on, things do change. We're not denying that, of course, the extreme weather has damaged us more, and we're not saying that sort of new threats and new risks have appeared. But it's the fact that sort of the old risks still haven't gone, and that's one of the major things we're suffering from, is that these risks haven't disappeared, and more we're adding to them, but they're becoming more severe. They're becoming worse. They're basically, we are need wider policy changes and priorities. You know, we're failing at the adaptation and building resilience, and that soon, because we're failing to become adaptable, that we might find that climate change will hit us, and we won't be prepared or won't be able to adapt to the new changes or the new climate.
I was reading about the internet, and the internet is at risk. Now here we don't have one internet to our house; we actually have two because of my business, and we like to think that if one of those gets damaged, like somebody digging up the cable and cutting it in half, it still meant that we could sort of carry on. Now that's okay. And that's what I've done to try and make myself a little bit more resilient. But what we have in this country is we have all our IT hubs basically in the same place. And when I travel into London, uh, which is a sort of an annual event, notice that most of the data centers are in the same place. And of course, if that place decides to get flooded, and it's in London and it's sort of in Docklands, so the possibility is there, then not one data center will go down, but the whole lot will go down. And basically, this means that, we've got a big problem. Basically, we need to have a system whereby we have resilience built in. So if this cable goes this way, then that cable ought to go to into another direction, so that if one's damaged, then we can do what I've done, which is to sort of have an alternative. But if both of my alternative broadbands eventually end up in the same place, not necessarily the same building, but the same place,
It's
if
not.
there's a damage, then
It's not really. Yeah, it's not really an alternative. It's not really a resistant system. Because it is failing at that point, because it is that idea. It's the idea that we have both BT and Virgin infrastructure. Sort of, when one system goes down, the other is there to cope with the sort of system until the other one's been brought up. That's one of the things we've got. But of course, we're not talking necessarily about that. We're talking about, say, there is only one power grid. Can you get power around a dead spot?
yeah,
And
water as well. If we have a major sort of uh, water breach, my mum had one near her in Southampton, and sort of a quarter of the town had no water for several days. Now, they did have a system. My mum's old, and she's on this little list, and they said they'll bring water to her. Yeah, and that's the theory. The practice was they just said, yes, water's at this place, madam, you can come and get it. Now, she's 91 with one of these little walker trolley things, And I could just see her walking 5 miles with this up and down hills to go and get a bottle of water, which she would then say to the nice little man, "And where do you expect me to carry this, sunshine?" And then walk another 5 miles back. Hmm. We need alternatives. We need, when you build in structures, we need better design. And when we're building new towns, we need to put in better design. And at the moment, and that still falls with the sort of the government, there aren't any plans to do anything like that. There are no plans to have alternative power supplies, alternative water supplies, alternative sewage, which is what gives us the resilience that we need.
Yes.
Yeah, that was hammering that one home a little bit, but still. This has been the Going Green podcast, having a look at the sticky mess we're in at the
Yeah.
moment.
And the problems globally
And with the
causing.
fact that we are still strikingly unprepared for climate change and climate resilience. Things are going to get worse before they get better. And let's hope that this doesn't cost any lives. You've been listening to the Going Green podcast. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another topic on Going Green. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And a goodbye from me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.